In Pit Lane, brought to you by Online Invent, and with thanks to our Platinum Star Patreon supporters. Everybody, and welcome to another edition of In Pit Lane. Well, as you can see, we're not in the studios of RMI TV Student Television tonight in the heart of Grand Prix City, Melbourne. We are in fact in the corporate headquarters of In Pit Lane here beyond the suburban curtain. Yes, it is of course the most sacred day of all for Australian public servants everywhere, Easter Tuesday, and as a result the university is closed. But we will be back of course next week. But tonight on the program, we're going to take you back to Rob Roy and the Rob Roy Revival. It was held a little bit earlier this year. We're going to show you some amazing looking cars, some cars going back all the way to 1908. That's coming up a little bit later on in the program. Also, we've all heard about Shane van Gisbergen's incredible move to NASCAR and how successful it's been. Well, that's from our perspective, but what do the Americans think? Tonight we'll be getting an American perspective straight from the horse's mouth when we talk to Samuel Stubbs. He's the host of the popular NASCAR podcast, Below the Yellow Line, and he'll be telling us all about the reaction over there to Shane van Gisbergen and also what his success or otherwise might mean for Australian supercar drivers in the future. But right now, let's catch up with all of the week's motorsport news. Let's check out the In Pit Lane Motorsport News. BMWs dominated last weekend's Bathurst 6-hour race with the team of Jayden Ojeda, Simon Hodges and George Madecki taking a late race lead to lead home fellow BMW drivers Thomas Randall, Ben and Michael Cavich, who just held out the other BMW of Will Davison, Berrick Linton and Tim Leahy. It was a great performance from Team Bocchini as they became the first all-female team to stand on Bathurst's top step, winning Class B1 and cracking the top 10 outright in the process. The race had plenty of drama with a record equalling 12 safety cars. The biggest crash of the race was the class-leading Mustang of Grant Denyer and the father and son pair of Tony and Ryder Quinn. Ryder Quinn was behind the wheel when the car hit the wall hard. Thankfully, he was able to walk to the waiting medical car. Also on track at Mount Panorama, the opening round of the 2024 Formula Ford Series. New South Wales drivers Eddie Beswick and Cody Mains-Rutty left the mountain on equal points for the weekend, but Beswick was declared overall winner due to winning the final race of the weekend. Kobe Williams was the first of the Victorian drivers home in 5th place, just ahead of Joe Fawcett. Well, the growth of GT4 racing in Australia continues with the news that Sam Brabham and Melbourne driver Antonio Astuti will be joining the series at its debut at Phillip Island next weekend. The pair will join father and son team of Rob and Bailey Love in a pair of AMG Mercedes GT4s. The Love family team is new to motorsport competition and this season will mark the father and son's first full season of national level racing. The standalone GT4 series will just be one of an impressive lineup of categories at Phillip Island that includes GT3, Trans Am, the Radical Cup, Porsche Michelin Challenge and the TCR series. Well, at first the news that Formula One owners Liberty Media had just bought out MotoGP was treated as yet another annoying April Fool's story. But no, this one was real. Liberty has acquired 86% of Dorna, valuing the world's leading motorcycle racing championship at $4.53 billion. Dorna will stay an independently run company with long-serving Dorna CEO Camillo Espeleta remaining in his position. Dorna also promotes the World Superbike Championship as well as the Moto2 and Moto3 categories. However, a possible black flag on the deal could be thrown out by the European Union, who are expected to scrutinise the takeover under their very tough antitrust laws. Well, the 2024 Formula One season resumes this weekend with the Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka. After his shock retirement at Albert Park, champion Max Verstappen is confident that this weekend's race should see a return to business as usual. But with a resurgent Ferrari bolstered by Carlos Sainz's surprise victory in Melbourne, they're also confident of being able to take the fight to Red Bull. One driver under increasing pressure will be Daniel Ricciardo, despite assurances that his drive for this year is not in any danger. Team RB Technical Director Joey Edgerton says that Ricciardo's been working hard to make his car more to his liking, and he should be up to speed in the next few races. However, the Australian will have one less session to come to grips with his car and the circuit, with the news that Japanese junior Ayumu Osawa will drive the Australian's car in Friday practice for the Japanese Grand Prix. In NASCAR, Denny Hamlin scored his second victory in the last three races, winning in overtime last Sunday night at Richmond Raceway. The victory is Hamlin's fifth at his hometown track. In a welcome return to the podium for Ford, Joey Logano finished second, followed home by Kyle Larson and Martin Truex Jr., who led for most of the race. The race got off to an unusual start after NASCAR decided to start the race on a wet track with wet weather tyres, something not usually seen on oval tracks. Meanwhile, in the Xfinity race on Saturday, Shane van Gisbergen had a pretty uneventful race, finishing in 15th position. And we'll be talking with Sam Stubbs from the NASCAR podcast Below the Yellow Line about Van Gisbergen's season so far in the USA a little bit later on in the program. And speaking of supercar drivers taking to the NASCAR circuit, Cam Waters will become the latest driver to try his hand at NASCAR this Saturday morning Australian time when he races a Thor Sport Racing F-150 in the Craftsman Truck Series at Martinsville. The deal came together late last week and has been assisted by Ford Performance Racing in the USA. Waters might be new to the high banking at Martinsville, but of course he's not a total stranger to oval track racing as a regular sprint car competitor over the supercar off-season. And chiropractors and physiotherapists right across Melbourne are on high alert for next Monday, with the news that the Victorian Supercar Championship will stage a round at Calder Park this weekend. The event will be held as part of PIARC's latest Access event, which will also see a number of sprint races for club members. The thought of what it feels like to drive an unsprung 280km/h supercart around the bumpy Calder Park circuit makes my back ache even now. And that's the in-pit lane news for this WrestleMania week 2024. When we come back, we will be joined by Samuel Stubbs from the Below the Yellow Line podcast to talk about the American perspective on Shane van Gisbergen's NASCAR season so far, and what it might mean for supercar racing here down under. And coming up a little bit later on in the program, we're going to take you back to the Rob Roy Hill Climb and the Rob Roy Revival. You're watching In Pit Lane right across Melbourne and Geelong on Channel 31. Don't go away, we'll be right back.
Get the phone ringing for your business with website development and SEO services from Online Invent. Visit onlineinvent.com.au.
Welcome back to In Pit Lane. Well, of course, we've all seen the success of Shane van Gisbergen after his incredible debut win on the streets of Chicago last year in NASCAR, and of course his move up to full-time NASCAR racing in 2024. We know that it's been very popular over here, but what about in the United States? Well, it seems that he's captured the public's imagination. Racer magazine, a very prestigious publication, recently had an article which claimed that he was, quote, a breath of fresh air, a much-needed breath of fresh air for NASCAR racing over there. Well, do other people feel that way? What do Americans think about Shane van Gisbergen's move to NASCAR? And also, what might it mean for Australian drivers looking to move to NASCAR in the future? Last week I had the opportunity to catch up with Samuel Stubbs. He's the host of the podcast, the NASCAR podcast, Below the Yellow Line. And I started off by asking him whether he thought Shane van Gisbergen was in fact the breath of fresh air that NASCAR needed.
He's about as big of a breath of fresh air as you can get, right? Coming over from Auckland, New Zealand. Who's ever heard of Auckland, New Zealand here as NASCAR fans? I know I hadn't before SVG came over. That Chicago win, watching that last year was, I've been watching this sport for over a decade now. I've seen a lot of incredible moments. I've cried a lot of happy tears. I didn't cry when he won that race, but I just kind of sat there starstruck, dumbstruck, right? Because you have a guy that has never raced in a NASCAR stock car before. There's only one driver. His name is Marvin Burke. He won at some random short track in the 50s. He's the only other driver beside Shane van Gisbergen, I believe, to win in their first start. I might be wrong. Maybe Johnny Mance, some other people did it.
I think Mark Donoghue might have won on debut
Yeah.
from memory.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
He was the other one. He was the other one. I mean, that's not a bad name to
No,
emulate.
sir, not at all.
The interesting thing was, I think I speak for as most Australians and most New Zealanders is, of course, at that time, I mean, when the race was running in Chicago, the races, if it's a Sunday afternoon race in the States, it's early Monday morning here, and I got up about 7:30 or something, and so the race was more than halfway over, and I thought, oh, I'll see how it's going, and I turned on the television here, and he was back in about 18th spot. And then sort of 2 laps later, he was 15th. And I think everybody in Australia went, yeah, he's going to win this. And, of course, he did, because we've seen it 1,000 times before, but, in races over here. But I suppose the big challenge for him, of course, for this year, for the full year, is going to be ovals. And so far he's acquitted himself surprisingly well. But how big a challenge do you think that's going to be? I mean, because obviously, street circuits are his bread and butter over here. There's quite a few of them in the Supercar series. Whereas even for the experienced NASCAR drivers, it was a pretty new experience. But how do you think he's going in terms of getting used to the ovals?
I think he's doing about as well as you can expect somebody who has never really raced on a NASCAR oval before to do. Last year, I believe his only start in a national series of NASCAR, the top 3 series, was a truck series start at IRP. And he did pretty well. He finished, I think, around 17th, 18th spot. Of course, the only bad thing probably about him winning that Chicago race is that you have all these expectations placed on your shoulders, right? All of a sudden now, everybody expects you to be the next Richard Petty, the next Dale Earnhardt, the next Mario Andretti. They think you're going to go out there and beat everybody. I think the thing that everybody forgot is that, hey, he's still new. He's incredibly talented. He won that first Cup race, but cut the guy some slack, right? It's not like he's going to go out here and take every checkered flag he sees. He has the talent to do so. He just might not have the experience yet. So this year, when you look, the one thing that's been really impressive to me is just how well he's taken care of the race car. In the Las Vegas race in the Xfinity Series, he had an engine issue early, I think maybe like 20 laps in, and he ends up finishing almost last. But you look at Daytona, you look at Atlanta, the super speedways, the drafting tracks, he did very well there. He finished top 5 at Atlanta. That's not an easy thing to do. He finished 6th at Phoenix, which is not a drafting track. That's not a track where the draft equalizes the field. That is a driver's racetrack. That's a track where it's all car, all driver, and your result at Phoenix is going to be an indicator of how well you ran. And he did very well there. This next weekend at Richmond, and then I think the weekend after that at Martinsville, it's going to be very telling, I think, of how well he is acclimating early. Richmond is a racetrack. It's a driver's racetrack, right? It's a track where tires are going to wear, especially that race being run at 1:30 local time. It's going to be hot. Sun's going to be beaming down on a beautiful Easter weekend. So that's going to be a big race for him. And then Martinsville, which NASCAR fans call it the short track. It is a track that tests your patience. It is a track that tests the durability of your race car. It is a track that tests your ability to keep your tempers in check, because you're going to get run into at Martinsville. If you ever have a clean car leaving Martinsville, you're going to have every car owner in the garage lining up to talk to you, because it's near impossible to do unless you stay at the front all day. And that's everybody's goal, right? So if SVG can come away with a top 10 in one of those races, or even, top 15 in one of those races, or both of those races, if he can show that he can stick around with some of the top dogs, which is what he's done so far this year, that's a very good indicator. And then you look at other tracks like your Charlottes, your Kansases, your so-called cookie cutter racetracks, right? Because they all kind of look the same. They all race different, but they all kind of look the same. If you look at those tracks, if he can just do his job, keep the car clean, finish top 10, top 15, those are going to turn into top 5s, and your top 5s are going to turn into wins. So it's difficult to really predict things in modern day NASCAR, because modern day NASCAR is about as crazy as you can get, especially on some of these ovals when you have late restarts and fuel strategy and things. But I think SVG is doing just fine right now, and I think if he just keeps doing what he's been doing, keep the car clean, control what he can control, he's going to have a pretty good season on the ovals. And then on the road courses, who knows, if he does as well as he did at Coda on Saturday, he might just win the rest of those altogether.
What does this mean for his success for other Australian supercar drivers? Do you think this is going to sort of get to other teams, looking out and saying, well, let's have a look at these supercars and see whether there's anybody else over there, like a Brody Kostecki or someone like that?
I think it will. And, you mentioned Brody Kostecki, and he came over and ran the Indy Road Course last year for Richard Childress Racing. I believe he's running a couple races for them again. And I completely agree. I think there are going to be some NASCAR team owners looking at some supercar drivers. And I don't know how you guys feel about this over here. And I say this as someone with not a lot of knowledge about supercars and how, teams work over there. But if I'm a team owner in the Australian Supercar Series, I'm hoping my driver's the next Shane van Gisbergen, but I'm also not hoping my driver's the same Shane van Gisbergen at the same time, right? Because you want a guy like Shane who's going to go out and win just a slew of races each and every year. You want a guy that has a championship pedigree, that has championship level talent behind the wheel, but you also don't want your driver to get poached by NASCAR.
Thanks to Samuel Stubbs for that interview. And remember, if you'd like to check out his podcast, if you're into NASCAR racing or you want to know more about it, check out Below the Yellow Line. It's available where all good podcasts are distributed. And also, just a reminder that if you'd like to see the interview in full, it'll be up on the In Pit Lane YouTube channel. But we're going to take a break right now here on the program. When we come back, we're going to take you back a few weeks to the Rob Roy revival, catch up with some fabulous and some very unique cars that are out there, and of course the people who drive them. You're watching In Pit Lane. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Get the phone ringing for your business with website development and SEO services from Online Invent. Visit onlineinvent.com.au.
Welcome back to In Pit Lane, coming to you from the corporate headquarters of In Pit Lane, here beyond the suburban curtain. My spare bedroom at home. Now, a few weeks ago, you might remember, we took you out to Rob Roy for the fabulous Rob Roy revival. It's become an event that's become incredibly popular over the last couple of years since the break for the pandemic, and is really sort of getting attention, right around Australia as being sort of a highlight of the historic racing calendar. So we thought we'd take you back tonight. We, of course, didn't have time to catch up with everything a couple of weeks back, but there were some amazing cars there, some fabulous people who drove them, and we're going to catch up with that right now. So let's take you back a couple of weeks back in time, as it were, to the Rob Roy revival of 2024. It may not have the glamour and international profile of the famous Goodwood revival. No Formula One cars, world champions or stars of stage, screen and television. But John Bowe was there, and that's good enough for me. The MG Car Club's Rob Roy revival is slowly building a reputation as a highlight of a packed early season Melbourne motorsport calendar. Not as grand as Phillip Island, not the more mainstream corporate atmosphere of the Adelaide Motorsport Festival, but an honest, heartfelt celebration of the history of Australia's oldest continuing motorsport venue. The event attracted a wide variety of interesting cars of all shapes and sizes. Of course there were MGs, lots of MGs, but also cars like this curiosity from the beginning of last century. And yes, before any of the crew chime in, that was even before I was born.
Hi, I'm Stephen Dines. I've bought my 1908 AC tri-car. It's a one-cylinder twin-speed tri-car. It's the oldest remaining AC in the world, which I've had for 7 years and finished the restoration about 12 months ago. It has a running speed of about 40 kilometres an hour and a top speed of 65. And it was found, originally it was used by a geologist in Broken Hill, and then it was actually used at Barossa, Seppel's wineries in the Barossa Valley up until it was found abandoned in a shed at the winery back in the 1950s. First brought it on display at Giltrap's Museum in Queensland, and then later privately used when Giltrap's was dissolved. The total number of three-wheeled ACs are 31. Some are restored and some aren't, but for rare controlled ACs there's only 8, which I think there's only about 2 or 3 still running. They made 2,500 AC tri-cars. A lot of them were AC sociables where you sat next to each other up the front. A few passenger models where the passengers sat up the front, which is called a 4-car. Riley and a lot of the other major manufacturers in England made 4-cars. And they also came out with a box in the front called an auto carrier, which was released in 1904 and continued on up until 1916 when the factory was turned over to Warwork. AC's own design. AC designed 2 motors. The same designer designed the one-cylinder air-cooled motor in 1904, and they also in 1919 designed the overhead cam 6, which ran up till 1963. And after that, of course, they became AC Cobras with a Ford V8 motor.
Like I said, there was no shortage of MGs. But this one was more Oakley than Oxford.
Name's Andrew Clayton. This is my MGTC, which isn't really an MGTC. It's a Holden Grey Motor Special. I christened her Maggie X, the X because she's a bit of a mongrel in many ways, more ways than one. So she's a TC, but in about 1960 she was built with a grey motor, Holden Grey motor, a pretty hot one. In the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, down in Blackburn, by a guy in his mum's garage, just a young engineer who just wanted a fast car but didn't have any money. And it's been that way ever since. I discovered her about 25 years ago in a shed and got her back on the road, and she's a great old thing. So she runs with a grey motor, short and Morris Minor rack and pinion steering, Holden diff. So there's not a lot of MG left in her really, but she's a lovely old thing. I drive her most weeks, go out for drives with the mates on the weekend, and she's just a great thing. Brakes aren't really terrific. You've got to be a bit careful with the brakes, but like drum brakes on an old car, that is what it is. When I rebuilt her, I didn't want to restore her. I thought I'll keep her a bit scruffy. The scars and dents and scratches she got are all part of the history, and that's the key thing with these things. It's a part of Melbourne and Australian motoring history. So I really feel strongly about that. Back in the day, there were 4 or 5 of these running around Melbourne, but she's the only one left on the road. All the others have been wrecked, restored back to original, whatever. But she's the only one left, and I love it a bit.
Speaking of Holdens, one of the more modern cars at the revival was this ex-Bob Jane GTR XU1 Tirana, driven by former Sportsland driver Graham Whincup.
This is a car that I bought up on Jane probably 13 or 14 years ago, and Bob had bought it with Miles Johnson with the idea of restoring the car back to the original production touring car. And it sat in the shed out at Calder for years and years, and it was originally an old sports sedan, so all the guards had been cut off it and A9X flares and things like that put on it. So we bought it, Ron Harrop and I have restored it over many years, and it sat in the shed for quite a while because I was busy at work, and then I thought, well, I better get stuck into this thing, otherwise I'm going to be too old to drive it. So Jake Takeover come along and helped me finish the car off, and some of the guys from the old Monza days come in and helped me paint it, and so here it is today. There was no logbook with the car, and Miles doesn't remember, so I don't really know any history of the car at all. So we've made it as close as we can to what Bob had, and here it is today. I enjoy doing this sort of thing. We've done the Geelong Revival a couple of times. Went to the Adelaide Festival of Speed last year, which is an unbelievably good event, and we're going back to there in 2 weeks' time. So that's the sort of thing I enjoy doing now. We had a tribute run up at Winton with a few other guys who've got similar sort of cars. So, I'm not into the cut and thrust of motor racing anymore, probably getting a bit old to do that. But I just like the atmosphere, and I like hopping in and having a bit of fun.
For what it's worth, the fastest time of the weekend was set by Darren Visser in the Bates Cyclo, a car that ran with great success here back in the 1960s. It was a great weekend with nice cars, nice people, nice weather, accompanied by a nice picnic lunch and a glass of some of the Yarra Valley's nicest product. And you can be confident that come next year, everyone will be back to do it all again. And if you love your motorsport, you should probably join them. Next week on the program, a world premiere. Yes, a brand new Australian band, a local Melbourne band called Veiled Arch, will be making their world premiere next week in the In-Pit Lane studios in the heart of Grand Prix City, Melbourne. So stay tuned for that if you like sort of your heavy rock. They're the people to see next week on the program. Also, we'll be giving you a preview of that big Phillip Island, Race Phillip Island event happening down as part of the Shannon Speed Series next weekend as well. So until we see you from all of us at In-Pit Lane, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week. Until then, bye for now.